The envelope didn't come through the mail slot. That was the first thing I noticed. No postmark, no stamp, just my name written across the front in handwriting I hadn't seen in 3 years. Careful, slightly tilted letters that leaned into each other like they were keeping warm. My mother's handwriting. I recognized it before I even finished reading my own name. I was standing in the doorway of my apartment in Roanoke, Virginia, still wearing my jacket from the night shift, a paper bag of groceries in one hand and my keys in the other. It was 6:40 in the morning, January. The kind of cold that doesn't announce itself, it just settles into you while you're thinking about something else. The envelope was on the floor, just inside the door. Someone had pushed it under from the outside. I stood there for a long time. My name on that envelope was Nora Calloway. I was 19 years old. I had $310 in a checking account that charged me $12 a month to exist. I had a 10-day eviction notice folded into my back pocket that I'd been trying not to think about since Thursday. I worked the overnight shift at a Sunoco station on the edge of town, and I slept in a studio apartment with a window that rattled every time a truck went by on the interstate, which was often because the interstate never stopped. I had been living like that for a year and a half. Before that, I had lived at St. Anne's Group, home on Callaway Street, which I always thought was a strange coincidence, and then decided wasn't a coincidence at all. Just the universe being indifferent in a way that looked like cruelty. St. Anne's was where the state put you when your parents disappeared, and your grandmother couldn't take care of you anymore, and no one else stepped forward. I had turned 16 there. I had turned 17 there. I had turned 18 there and walked out the front door with a paper bag and a bus pass and a handshake from a woman named Bernadette, who told me I was going to be fine. I was not fine, but I was upright. And in January of 2025, upright was what I had. I stepped over the envelope. I put the groceries away. Half a loaf of bread, a can of soup, a small container of coffee, creamer that had been on sale. I took off my jacket and hung it on the back of the chair. I sat down on the edge of my mattress and I looked across the room at the envelope on the floor, and I did not touch it. My mother was Elaine Calloway. She had dark hair that she wore pulled back and a habit of leaving her reading glasses on top of her head and forgetting they were there. She wrote thank you notes for everything. She was an investigative journalist for a regional paper out of Roanoke, and she had spent most of my childhood believing that the truth was a thing worth chasing regardless of the cost. My father was Warren Calloway. He was a geological engineer who worked long contracts and came home smelling like diesel and river clay, and always brought me something small from wherever he had been: a smooth stone, a feather, a postcard from a town too small to have tourists. They disappeared in October of 2022. They told me they were driving up to the Blue Ridge for a weekend, something about a property matter. They said they'd be back Sunday night. Sunday came. They didn't. Their car was found on a Forest Service road outside Harrow Creek, Virginia. Doors locked. Wallets and phones inside. A thermos of coffee in the cup holder still half full. Search and rescue spent 11 days on the ridge. They found my father's flannel jacket hanging from a fence post. They found my mother's notebook on a creek bank, the pages swollen with water. They never found bodies. The sheriff called it a probable accident. Colorado law, no Virginia law made us wait 7 years to declare them dead on paper. So they weren't dead. They were just gone. I was 16 years old. My grandmother Willa couldn't care for me anymore because her mind had started its slow surrender, and the state moved me into St. Anne's, and I waited out what was left of my childhood in a twin bed that squeaked when I turned over. I did not open the envelope that morning. I didn't open it the next morning either. On the third morning, a Wednesday in the middle of January, I came home from my shift, and the sky outside was the color of old pewter, and the forecast said snow by afternoon. And I sat down on the floor next to the envelope, and I picked it up with both hands. The paper was heavy, cream colored, the kind my mother used for correspondence. Inside, no letter, just a small card, the same cream paper, and on it, in my mother's handwriting, shakier than I remembered, but unmistakably hers, 8 numbers separated by dashes: 472911103. And beneath the numbers, in that same careful hand, Ridgeback Cabin, Stone Mill Road, Harrow Creek, Virginia. He built it for you. Bay 9, Blue Ridge Self Storage, off Route 221. Go before she does. And then beneath that smaller, forgive the silence, my darling, it was the only way. M. I read it 4 times. Then I set it down on the floor in front of me, and I sat with my back against the wall, and I looked at the ceiling, and I let myself feel the full weight of what was in my hands. Because if you have ever received something from someone you believed was gone, a voicemail you'd never heard, a letter found in a drawer, a birthday card in handwriting you thought you'd never see again, then you already know what happens to your chest in a moment like that. If that's you tonight, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Leave it in the comments before we go any further. My first thought was that someone had learned to imitate her handwriting. My second thought was that I was still half asleep from the overnight shift, and I was imagining the whole thing. My third thought, the one that took hold and wouldn't let go, was that no one in the world would know my mother's private word for me. My darling. She had said it since I was small. She said it when she tucked my hair behind my ear. She said it at the end of phone calls. It was hers alone, and it was on that card. And it was real. I was going to Harrow Creek, but first I was going to see my grandmother. Willa Calloway was 76 years old that January, and she had been forgetting since I was 14. The nurses at Cedar Brook Memory Care called her good days, her clear days, the ones where her eyes would find you and hold like a lens snapping into focus. On her clear days, she knew my name. She held my hand and called me by it. On her other days, she called me by my father's name, Warren, and asked if I'd finished my homework. I never corrected her on those days. A woman who had loved a man for 50 years deserved to have him back now and then, even if only in pieces. I took the number 7 bus across town and walked the last 4 blocks in boots that were not built for the cold. The lobby of Cedar Brook smelled like antiseptic and the artificial vanilla of plug-in air fresheners. And the woman at the front desk smiled at me the way people smile at you when they know your situation and feel sorry about it. Willa was in the sunroom. She was sitting in a chair by the window, watching the first snow of the morning come down on the parking lot, a cream-colored blanket pulled across her lap, her hands folded on top of it like 2 small birds at rest. When she heard me come in, she turned, and her eyes found me. A clear day. "There you are," she said. "I was wondering when you'd come." I sat in the chair across from her, and I took her hands. Her skin was paper thin, the kind of thin that doesn't happen fast. It happens year by year, the body slowly becoming transparent. "Grandma," I said. "You look tired," she said. "You're working too hard." "I got a letter," I said, "from Mom." She didn't react the way I expected. She didn't startle or doubt or ask me to repeat myself. She just looked at me for a long, still moment, and then her eyes went wet and 2 tears ran down the creases of her cheeks and disappeared into her collar. "Oh, baby girl," she whispered. "Did you know?" I asked. "Did you know they were writing?" She squeezed my hands with more strength than I had expected from those thin fingers. "Your father called me," she said. Once, about 8 months ago, I think, or maybe longer. Time gets away from me. She shook her head. He said you'd understand when you got to the cabin. He said everything he needed to tell you was at the cabin. She paused. He said don't trust the woman with white hair. What woman, Grandma? But she was already drifting. I could see it, the focus softening, the eyes going somewhere I couldn't follow. She looked at me for a moment as if she was trying to hold on. He loves you so much, she said. And I wasn't sure anymore if she was talking about my father or my grandfather, and I decided it didn't matter. I stayed until the snow got heavy. When I kissed her forehead and left, she was looking out the window again, watching the snow, the way old people watch things that remind them of things they can't quite name anymore. I sat on the bus, back to my apartment, and I made a list on the back of a grocery receipt. What I owned: one duffel bag, one pair of boots, wrong for the weather, $310, a 10-day eviction notice, and an address in Harrow Creek written in my mother's handwriting. I went home. I packed the duffel bag. I left the eviction notice on the kitchen counter. I was done waiting. I was done. Blue Ridge. Self-storage sat off Route 221, about 40 minutes south of Roanoke, tucked between a shuttered farm supply store and a billboard advertising a personal injury attorney. The facility was a long row of corrugated metal doors in faded yellow, and at the near end of the lot was a small office with a hand-painted sign and a light on inside. I pushed the door open. A man looked up from behind a counter. He was somewhere around 70, with a face that had spent a great deal of time outdoors, thick gray eyebrows and reading glasses pushed up into what was left of his hair. A mug of coffee steamed at his elbow. He looked at me the way people look at you when they are deciding something. His name was Clifton Hale. He set down his newspaper. He folded it slowly and deliberately. He studied my face with an expression I couldn't quite read, not unfriendly, but careful. Measuring. You the Calloway girl, he said. My throat tightened. Yes, sir. He nodded once as if something he had been waiting to have confirmed had finally been confirmed. He stood up and his knees popped, and he reached under the counter and brought out a small brass key on a plain ring. 3 years and 4 months I've been watching for you, he said. Your father came in one morning in the spring of 2022, paid the unit fees 2 years in advance cash, said to hold the key until his daughter came to claim it, said to give her whatever she needed and not ask questions. He paused. I've held it longer than 2 years, so I paid the extra myself. Figured it was the right thing. I stared at him. You paid out of your own pocket. Your daddy was a decent man, Clifton said simply. Decent men deserve that. He came around the counter, and I followed him out into the cold past rows of identical metal doors, all the way to the back corner of the lot, where Bay 9 sat at the very end of the row, its padlock dusty with frost. Clifton handed me the key. Take your time, he said quietly. Whatever's in there, it was meant for you. He turned and walked back toward the office without another word. I stood in front of that door for a full minute. My breath came out white. The cold was the kind that sits in your ears. I put the key in the lock. It turned on the first try. I lifted the door. The metal rolled up with a slow grinding groan, and the winter light came in from behind me, and what I saw inside stopped my breath completely. A truck. Not just any truck. A 1974 Ford Bronco forest green with a white roof sitting on 4 clean tires like it had just come off a showroom floor. Chrome bumpers. A bench seat the color of caramel leather. Polished within an inch of its life. I walked toward it slowly. My legs didn't feel like my own. I opened the driver's door. The smell reached me before anything else. leather and something like cedar, and beneath it, faint but absolutely unmistakable, my father. Not a cologne, not a product, just the particular warmth of him as if he'd stepped out of the seat 5 minutes ago and the air hadn't finished grieving his absence yet. I ran my hand along the dashboard, and then I saw it. Engraved into the metal, just below the odometer, in neat block letters someone had pressed into the surface with care and patience. For Nora, when the road finds you. Dad, April 2022. 6 months. 6 months before my parents disappeared, my father had restored this truck, driven it to a storage unit 40 minutes from home, paid 2 years of fees in advance, and engraved my name into it. That is not what a man does when he's planning a weekend trip. That is what a man does when he knows something is coming, and he wants to make sure the person he loves most will have something solid under her when it arrives. I sat down in the driver's seat. I put my hands on the steering wheel. The leather was cold, but it fit my hands in a way that felt like it had always been waiting for them. And then I looked down. On the passenger seat, half tucked under the floor mat, was a cell phone. A prepaid flip phone, the kind you buy at a gas station. I picked it up. The battery was full. Someone had charged it recently. There was one text message on the screen, received 2 hours and 14 minutes ago, from a number I didn't recognize. It said, "Don't open the second note until you're at the cabin. Someone watched this unit last night. Drive straight through. Don't stop." I read it twice. Then I looked up and out through the windshield at the empty lot, the winter sky, the long, quiet rows of storage doors. Someone knew I was here. Someone who had charged that phone recently. Someone who was watching. I put the phone in my pocket, pulled the door of Bay 9 shut behind me, and drove the Bronco out of that lot without looking back. The drive to Harrow Creek took 2 hours and 40 minutes on roads that wound up into the Blue Ridge, like the landscape was trying to slow you down on purpose. The radio in the Bronco got 3 stations clearly, and then nothing but static. And after a while, I turned it off and drove in silence through a country that was white with snow and gray with sky, and absolutely still in the way that mountain country gets in January, when everything living has gone down deep into itself to wait. I stopped once in a town called Alderton at a gas station to fill the tank. A man pumping gas in the next bay looked at the Bronco and said, "They don't make them like that anymore." I said, "No, sir, they don't." And he nodded and went back to his business, and I went back to mine. Harrow Creek, Virginia, was the kind of town that looked like it had been built by people who intended to stay. The main street was 3 blocks long, lined with riverstone and weathered wood buildings that had been standing long enough to stop worrying about it. A hardware store, a feed and seed shop with bags of winter grit stacked outside, a post office the size of a large closet, a diner with red vinyl stools visible through the front window, a hand-lettered sign reading Vera's in the glass, a white clapboard Baptist church at the far end, a 2-story Victorian that had been converted into a law office, the name Sylvia Crane Attorney, at law, stenciled on the door in gold. Population, according to the sign at the town, limits 2,890. I pulled into the lot beside the diner because I was hungry and because I needed to ask directions, and because I had been driving for nearly 3 hours on nothing but half a cup of day-old coffee, and I wasn't sure I could think straight without sitting down. The bell above the door rang when I walked in. The diner smelled like bacon grease and coffee and biscuits and the particular warmth of a place that has been feeding people for decades without apology. 6 of the 8 stools at the counter were occupied by older men in work coats, who all looked up when I came in and then went back to their conversations. The woman behind the counter was somewhere in her early 60s, with gray hair pulled back and a set of eyes that missed nothing. She had the quality of someone who has seen a great many things walk through her door and has managed to remain curious about all of them. She brought a mug of coffee to the counter before I even sat down. "You're not from around here," she said. It was not unfriendly. It was just accurate. "No, ma'am. I'm looking for Stone Mill Road." She set the coffee pot down. She looked at my face for a moment with an expression that went through several things quickly before settling on something careful and warm. "Are you a Calloway?" she asked. For the second time that day, my throat went tight. "Yes, ma'am." Something shifted in her face, not surprise. Something more like relief. The particular relief of a person who has been waiting for something for a long time and has started to worry that it might not come. "My name's Vera Sutton," she said. "I've been running this diner for 22 years. She reached under the counter and brought out a framed piece of cloth, a square of white paper, actually matted, and hung in plain black wood. She set it on the counter in front of me. It was a napkin. On it, in my mother's handwriting, was a drawing, a small stick figure of a girl on a man's shoulders. Both of them laughing, the man's arm stretched up to hold the girl's ankles. And, underneath, in my mother's handwriting, Nora, age 3. My whole heart. I couldn't speak. "Your mama came in here every Saturday morning for close to a year," Vera said. "She sat right where you're sitting. She ordered the same thing every time: 2 eggs wheat toast, black coffee. And she talked about you like you were the best thing she'd ever done." She paused. "I kept this on the wall behind the register. I took it down when I heard you were coming because I figured you'd want it." I put my hand flat on the glass over the napkin. "She's alive," I said. It came out before I could decide to say it. Vera looked at me for a long moment. "I know, honey," she said quietly. I stared at her. "I didn't know for certain until about 6 months ago," she said. "Your mama called me. Just the once. She said she couldn't say where she was, but she said her daughter was going to come one day, and when she did, I should give her that napkin and tell her she was loved." She slid the framed napkin across the counter toward me. "Stone Mill Road is 4 miles north on Route 12, she said. "There's a mailbox on the right side that says Pruitt. Ridgeback Cabin is the property at the top of the second meadow. Keep going past where you think you've gone too far." She paused. "And Nora, you be careful who you trust up there, all right." I left money on the counter and walked out into the cold with my chest full of something I didn't have a name for yet. I set the framed napkin on the passenger seat of the Bronco beside the prepaid phone, and I drove north on Route 12, and the road climbed into the trees. The cabin came up out of the meadow, the way things do when they've been there long enough to belong, not place, just present. It was built of thick gray-brown logs, stacked and notched the old way wide and low, with a covered front porch that sagged gently on the left side, and a stone chimney that went up through the roof line and into the pewter sky. Pine and bare aspen stretched out across 80 acres in every direction. A split rail fence ran along the near field posts, half buried in the snow. A small barn stood 50 yards off, listing slightly west. A frozen creek ran along the tree line, its surface the color of old mirror glass. And on the front porch, in a wooden rocking chair that had survived 3 Virginia winters, outdoors, sat a man. He was in his late 60s. Tall even sitting down, lean the way men get lean from a lifetime of outdoor work, with a gray beard trimmed close, and the kind of stillness that takes a long time to earn. Beside him on the porch rail was a thermos. He was not surprised to see me. He stood up when I climbed out of the Bronco. He walked to the top of the porch steps. "Took you a little longer than I thought," he said, not unkindly, like a man who had been prepared to wait considerably longer if needed. You knew I was coming, I said, since the day your father asked me to watch this place. He came down the steps and held out his hand. His grip was the kind that came from decades of actual work. Garrett Pruitt, I've got the place at the bottom of the hill, and this here is my wife. The front door of the cabin had opened. A woman came onto the porch, small and sharp-eyed, with white hair, cut short, and a way of taking in a room, or, in this case, a person that was quick and thorough. She was carrying a covered dish. Loretta Pruitt, she said. Retired nurse, retired teacher's aide, and the woman who has been cooking double portions every Sunday for 3 years and 4 months, in case today was the day. She looked me up and down once. You're too thin. That'll change. She went back inside with the dish. Garrett watched me look at the cabin. Go on in, he said. It's yours. The air inside was cold and still and smelled of cedar and something older wood smoke that had soaked into the walls over many winters. A main room with a stone fireplace, a cracked leather armchair angled toward it, a braided oval rug on the pine floor, a small kitchen with a white enamel stove, a round wooden table with 4 chairs, a bedroom through a door in the back wall, a loft above accessible by a wooden ladder. Everything clean, everything tended. Garrett had been up here every Sunday. You could tell. On the mantel above the cold fireplace, a silver picture frame. I crossed the room and picked it up. It was a photograph. Me, 3 years old, on my father's shoulders, both of us laughing at something outside the frame. My mother beside us, her hand on my father's arm, her head tilted back mid-laugh. She was wearing a red flannel shirt I had never seen before. And, behind them barely visible at the edge of the frame, was the front porch of this very cabin. This porch. This railing. I had no memory of this place. I was certain I had never been here. And yet there I was in that photograph, grinning like I had been born on these floorboards. I turned the frame over in my hands, and then I saw it. At the left edge of the photograph, a clean, straight cut in the paper. The precise, deliberate cut of a pair of scissors. Someone had been standing beside my mother in this picture. Someone had been cropped out. The edges of the cut were pale and slightly raised. Recent. Not years old. Weeks, maybe. Someone had been in this cabin recently. Someone had stood at this mantel and removed themselves from my family's history. I set the frame down carefully. I went up the ladder to the loft. In the corner, under the slope of the roof, was a wooden chest. Plain pine, a simple hasp, no lock. I carried it down to the table and opened it. Letters. Hundreds of them. I reached in and pulled out a handful, and the cold that went through me had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. Each envelope was addressed to Nora Calloway, care of St. Anne's Group Home, Calloway Street, Roanoke, Virginia. Each one had a postmark. Each one had been stamped across the front in red ink. The ink slightly smeared, the letters fat and bureaucratic. Return to sender, addressee unknown. I pulled out more and more. The postmarks ran without interruption from November 2022 through December 2024. Every month, some months 2 or 3 envelopes. My father's block printing on some, my mother's careful hand on others. All of them returned. Every single one. I had lived at St. Anne's for 2 full years. My name was in every state database. There was no version of the world in which every one of these letters was returned by accident. Someone had intercepted them. Someone between the post office and the front desk of St. Anne's had taken these letters, every one of them, and stamped them and sent them back. For 3 years. I opened the letter at the top of the pile. my mother's handwriting. Dated December 14th, 2024. 3 weeks ago. My darling Nora, we don't know if this will reach you. None of them have. But your father says a day will come when they stop coming back. And so we keep trying, because that is what you do when you love someone. You turned 19 last Tuesday. Your father baked a chocolate cake. He has become a surprisingly decent baker, which I tell him is the most unexpected development of the last 3 years. He sang to you. He has a terrible singing voice, my darling. You inherited my ear, thank God. I hope you are warm. I hope someone has been kind to you. I hope you know that you have been loved every single day of these 3 years, even when we could not say it out loud. All my love, always, Mom. I put the letter down on the table. I pressed my hand flat against it. And then I put my face in my hands, and I sat in the cold and quiet of that cabin, and I made a sound I didn't know I was capable of making. The kind that comes from somewhere below language, from the part of you that has been holding something in place for so long that when the weight finally shifts, the whole structure shakes. I cried for a long time. When I finally lifted my head, the afternoon light had moved across the room. The honey-colored slant of late-day sun was coming through the west window and laying itself across the floorboards, and in that light, I could see the dust motes turning slowly in the air, and the room felt not empty. Full. Full of the people who had lived here, who had built fires in that fireplace, and set food on that table, and looked out those windows at this same mountain. My parents had not just come here for a weekend, they had lived here. This was a home. There was a sound on the porch. Footsteps. I stood up. Through the window, I saw Garrett Pruitt's truck at the far end of the drive, and Garrett himself coming up the porch steps, and, behind him, Loretta carrying the covered dish she had brought inside, and, apparently now, reheated steam rising faintly from under the lid. I opened the door before they could knock. Loretta looked at my face, at the red eyes, and the letter still in my hand, and she did not make a production of it. She set the dish on the table, took off her coat, hung it on the hook by the door, and said, "Sit down, honey. You're going to eat something warm, and then we are going to talk." Garrett sat across from me. Loretta served the food, a chicken and wild rice soup that smelled like it had been simmering since morning. "How long have you known?" I asked. Garrett folded his hands on the table. "Your daddy came down to my place in the spring of 2022, he said. He said he needed a favor, and it was going to be a long one. He told me enough that I understood the shape of it. He asked me to watch the cabin, keep it up, and make sure it was here when his daughter came." He paused. "He said she'd come. He was certain of it. He didn't tell you when. He said when the time was right." Garrett looked at me steadily. "I didn't miss a Sunday." 3 years and 4 months, I said. 172 Sundays, he said. "But who's counting?" Loretta set a biscuit on the edge of my bowl without being asked. "There's something else you should know," she said. She looked at Garrett. Garrett reached into the inside pocket of his coat and brought out an envelope, sealed. My father's block, printing on the front Nora. First letter, read when you are ready. First. "He left 3, Garrett said. He gave them to me the last time I saw him the week before. He and your mama drove up here for the last time. He said to give them to you in order when you were ready for each one. He said not to rush you." I took the envelope and held it in both hands. "He said something else," Garrett said. He looked at me with the direct, unhurried attention of a man who has decided that the truth is worth the discomfort of saying it plainly. "He said somebody else was going to come up this road, and she was not going to tell you the truth. He wanted you to have at least one honest face up here before she did." The fire in the fireplace was going. Now, Loretta had started it while I was looking at the envelope, and the light it threw was warm and unsteady and made the room look the way rooms look in memory. Who? I asked. Garrett shook his head. He made me swear I wouldn't say her name, said you had to hear it from him. He nodded at the envelope in my hands. I didn't open it that night. I wasn't ready. I understood somehow that my father had known I wouldn't be, that he had built time into the architecture of this thing, the way an engineer builds tolerance into a structure, accounting for the stress of what it has to bear. After Garrett and Loretta left, I went through the cabin room by room. In the kitchen, my mother's handwriting on a list taped inside a cabinet door: baking soda, vanilla cornmeal, salt, coffee, the good kind. In the bedroom, my father's reading glasses on the nightstand, next to a dog-eared copy of Lonesome Dove, with a strip of paper marking his place somewhere in the middle. In the bathroom, a small glass jar of my mother's bergamot hand cream on the edge of the sink, dried completely down to nothing. The way things dry when they are left alone for 3 years, but not thrown away because someone intended to come back. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. Then I went to the fireplace, and I sat in my father's leather armchair with a blanket across my knees, and I looked at the photograph in the silver frame on the mantel, the one with the cut edge, the one with the missing person, and I thought about what Garrett had said. Somebody else is going to come up this road. Outside, the snow had started again. It came down in the orange light of the porch lamp, in slow curtains covering the tire tracks I'd made, coming up the drive, covering the world, until there was only the cabin and the fire and the quiet and the 3 letters my father had left me. I pulled the first one from its envelope. I held it under the lamp, and I began to read. The handwriting was my father's, the same block print from the storage unit. From the tableau of the Bronco, from 100 birthday cards and notes left on kitchen counters throughout my childhood. But reading it now in this chair, in this cabin, with the snow coming down outside and the fire going behind me, felt different from any of those things. It felt like sitting down across from him. Nora, it began. If you are reading this, you found the cabin. Good. That means Clifton held the key, and the Bronco still runs, and Garrett Pruitt is still the most reliable man I have ever known in my life. Take your time with this house. It is yours now. There is more to tell you than one letter can hold. Your mother and I agreed we would leave you 3. This is the first. It is the one that tells you we are not dead. I need you to read that sentence again. We are not dead. We are alive. We are in a small house in a state I am not going to name yet, living under different names. And we are well, and we have thought about you every single day of the last 3 years. We did not disappear by accident. We planned it. We left the car. We left our phones and our wallets because those were the things that could be tracked. We hiked out a different way to a road where a friend was waiting. We did this because a woman had spent the better part of a year making it clear that she would hurt you if we did not give her what she wanted. The police couldn't stop her. The courts couldn't stop her. Our absence was the only thing left that could. I know what those 3 years cost you. I know about St. Anne's. I know about the overnight shifts and the apartment and the eviction notice. Yes, I know about the eviction notice. Your grandmother has been our one tether to you on her good days, and we have treasured every scrap of news she could give us. I am sorry, Nora. I am more sorry than I know how to write. The next letter will tell you who this woman is and why. But before you read it, I want you to spend a few days here. Let the town find you. Let the neighbors show you the people your mother and I were in this place. When you feel like you have something solid under your feet, and you will, because This mountain has a way of doing that. Ask Garrett for the second envelope. We are coming home. I swear it to you on every year of my life. We are coming home. Love, Dad. I folded the letter. I held it against my chest. Outside, the snow kept falling. And in the fireplace, the wood shifted and settled and threw a fresh pulse of warmth across the room. And I sat in my father's chair in my father's cabin, and I let myself, for the first time since I was 16 years old, believe that the people who loved me were still in the world. I didn't sleep much that night, but I slept in a real bed under a real quilt in a house that had been waiting for me. And that was enough to start. She came on the fourth morning. I had spent 3 days inside the skin of the cabin, learning it the way you learn a language slowly, by immersion, by making mistakes and correcting them. I learned that the second step of the porch stairs was soft in the middle and needed to be replaced before spring. I learned that the kitchen faucet ran cold for 30 seconds before it found its warmth. I learned that from the left side of the bed in the back bedroom, if you looked through the window at the right angle, when the sky was still dark and the snow had stopped, you could see 3 stars sitting in a line above the ridge, like they had been placed there deliberately. I learned that my father had stacked firewood along the side of the barn with the same methodical patience he had applied to everything in his life. Each row level, each piece, split to roughly the same size, covered with a tarp weighed down by 4 flat stones at the corners. Enough wood to carry a winter, possibly 2. I learned that my mother had kept a small kitchen garden in raised beds along the south wall of the cabin, now buried under a foot of snow, but visible in the architecture of the wooden frames that stood above the white, like the ribs of something waiting to breathe again. Garrett told me she had grown tomatoes and herbs, and along the front edge of every bed, row upon row of marigolds, the deep orange and rust kind that smell like earth in summer and stay bright until the first hard frost takes them. On the second day, Garrett came by in the morning with a thermos of coffee and spent 2 hours showing me how to check the pipes for freezing and how to prime the water pump if the pressure dropped. He didn't talk much while he worked. He didn't need to. There was a particular quality to his silence, the silence of a man who understood that sometimes the most useful thing you can offer another person is your presence and your competence and the reassurance that the practical world is still holding. On the third evening, Loretta came with a pot roast and stayed for supper. She sat at my mother's table and she talked about the town, about the people, about the years she had spent as a nurse at the county hospital, and then as a teacher's aide at Harrow Creek Elementary, and about the particular quality of mountain winter that made strangers into neighbors faster than any other season because cold had a way of reminding people that they needed each other. She told me things about my parents without me asking. She said my mother had a habit of sitting on the porch at dawn with a notebook even in cold weather, writing in the kind of focused silence that told you she was working something out. She said my father had helped Garrett re-roof the Pruitt barn the previous spring and had worked 2 full days without taking more than a sandwich break, and that Garrett, who was not a man who gave compliments freely, had said afterward that Warren Calloway was the best man he had worked beside in 20 years. I filed those things away. I placed them alongside the reading glasses on the nightstand and the grocery list taped inside the cabinet and the hand cream dried down to nothing in the bathroom. I was building a picture of my parents as people who had lived here fully for nearly a year before they had gone deeper into hiding. The cabin was not just a way station, it was a life, and they had built it here in this valley with these people and had intended it for me. On the third night, I asked Garrett for the second letter. He brought it the next morning, just as the sky was beginning to lighten, but I did not read it that day. Not. Because at 9:47 in the morning of the fourth day, a vehicle came up Stone Mill Road and turned into my drive, and what I felt when I saw it through the kitchen window was something I did not yet have a name for, a quick low warning in the center of my chest, like the feeling you get when you are walking in the dark and the ground changes under your foot before you can see why. The vehicle was a Mercedes SUV, silver, new. Too clean for a mountain road in January, the kind of clean that announces itself as intentional. It pulled up and stopped in the drive, and for a full minute, nothing happened. I watched from the kitchen window. The engine ran, then it cut off, and a woman got out. She was in her mid-50s. She moved the way expensive things move, with a kind of unhurried, deliberate ease that comes from never having had to rush. Her hair was white blonde, cut in a smooth bob that sat precisely at her jaw. She was wearing a camel-colored coat that reached her calves, leather gloves, the shade of dark honey, and boots that had not been purchased with mountain roads in mind. She stood beside the Mercedes for a moment and looked at the cabin with an expression I couldn't read from the window. Then she walked toward the porch with the measured confidence of someone who had rehearsed the approach and was satisfied with the plan. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, patient. I opened the door. Her face changed when she saw me. It was fast, a small involuntary tightening around the eyes, a fraction of a second, where the expression she had prepared was replaced by something rawer, something she hadn't quite managed to arrange in time. Then it was gone, smoothed over, and she smiled. The smile was warm and practiced, and reached most of the way to her eyes. "Oh my goodness," she said softly. Her voice was low and controlled, the kind of voice that had been trained to convey sincerity. "You look just like her. You have her whole face. You know that—" "I'm sorry," I said. "Who are you?" "I'm your aunt," she said. "I'm your mother's sister." A small, sorrowful pause, expertly timed. "My name is Vivian Ashby." "She never told you about me, did she?" It was not a question. I looked at her for a moment. My mother did not have a sister. I had known this my entire life, with the calm certainty of a person who has seen the full shape of their family and noted all the empty spaces. My mother had been an only child. Her parents were gone before I was born. There had never been an aunt. There had never been anyone on my mother's side at all, which was one of the particular loneliness of my particular childhood. "She didn't," I said. Vivian's smile shifted into something more complicated, more carefully sorrowful. "We were estranged," she said, "for a very long time. There was a situation years ago, a family matter, that I handled badly. I said things I shouldn't have said, and your mother, who was a woman of principle, did not forgive easily." She looked down for a moment. "I don't blame her for that. I've had a long time to sit with my part in it." She looked back up. "May I come in? It's quite cold." Every instinct I had said no. The warning in my chest was louder now, more specific. A focused pressure behind my sternum that I had learned over 19 years of navigating a world that had not been particularly gentle with me to pay attention to. But I needed to know who she was. And I needed her to tell me herself. I stepped back. She came inside. Her eyes moved across the room the way a surveyor's eyes move across a piece of land, quick methodical cataloging without appearing to. The photograph on the mantel, the wooden chest on the table, the letters spread beside it. She took inventory of all of it in the time it took her to unwrap her scarf, and her face gave nothing away, but her eyes missed nothing. She sat in one of the kitchen chairs. She set her purse on her lap. She crossed her ankles. "I know this must be overwhelming," she said. Arriving here, finding all of this, not knowing what any of it means. I can only imagine. She paused. I wanted to come and introduce myself as soon as I heard you'd arrived. In a town this small, news travels before the person does. How did you know I'd arrived? An old acquaintance mentioned it. She did not say who. What was the family matter? I asked. The one that caused the estrangement. Something shifted barely perceptible behind her eyes. She had expected to control the pace of this conversation, and I had declined to let her. A man named Harlan Ashby, she said. He was someone I knew, someone I cared for deeply at one point in my life. He was also someone your mother became close to in his final years. He was ill for a long time, and your mother, who was a very caring person, helped look after him. When he passed, he left your mother the bulk of his estate. She paused. Including this cabin, and a piece of land, and a substantial sum of money. And you felt you were owed part of that. The smile thinned by precisely the right amount to communicate wounded dignity. Harlan and I had a long history, decades. I felt that his final wishes did not fully account for that history. I challenged the will. I'm not proud of every decision I made during that time. She looked at me steadily. But I'm here now because I believe in doing things the right way. This property has a complicated legal history, Nora, and I think we should discuss it like the family we are. We are not family, I said. The smile held. Just. Your mother and I shared a grandmother, she said. On our mother's side. I know that's a distant connection, but it is a connection. And it gives me a legal standing that I did not pursue when your parents disappeared because I was grieving. I am pursuing it now. She opened her purse and removed a small cream-colored card. An attorney's card from a firm in Richmond. She set it on the table. You will be receiving paperwork from my attorney within the week. I wanted you to hear it from me first. I wanted you to know that this doesn't have to be adversarial. She stood. She smoothed her coat. She walked to the door. At the threshold, she turned, and there was something in her face that I couldn't read, not the performance of the last 20 minutes, but something underneath it, something harder and older and considerably less rehearsed. I didn't want this to be ugly, she said. I just want what's fair. She walked down the porch steps and across the drive and got into the silver Mercedes without looking back. I stood in the open doorway and watched the vehicle disappear down Stone Mill Road, and I listened until the sound of the engine was completely gone, swallowed up by the trees and the snow and the mountain quiet. Then I turned back to the mantel. I picked up the photograph in the silver frame. I carried it to the window where the light was better. I looked at it closely. My father's laughing face, my mother's red flannel shirt, my own 3-year-old self balanced on his shoulders. And then I looked at the left edge of the photograph, at the clean, straight cut that I had noticed 4 days ago, and set aside because I hadn't been ready to ask what it meant. The cut was deliberate, scissor precise, and the paper at the edge of the cut was pale, the way paper gets when the cut is recent enough that the edges haven't had time to yellow. I looked at the cut again, measured it against the memory of the woman who had just sat in my kitchen. The proportions were right. The height was right. Someone had been standing beside my mother in this photograph. Someone had stood at this mantel and removed herself from my family's history before I arrived. And that someone had just introduced herself as my aunt. I set the frame back on the mantel very carefully. Then I sat down in my father's armchair and I picked up the second envelope and I opened it. My father's block print. 4 pages front and back. Written according to the date at the top in September of 2022, 3 weeks before they disappeared. Nora, if you are reading this, Vivian has come. I knew she would. She is patient in the way that people are patient when they believe they are owed something and have decided to wait as long as necessary to collect it. Her name is Vivian Ashby. She is not your aunt. She was not your mother's sister. She was not your mother's anything. She was the wife of a man named Harlan Ashby, and Harlan Ashby was the reason your mother and I had to disappear. Here's what you need to know. Harlan Ashby was 68 years old when your mother first met him in the spring of 2020. He was a retired civil engineer who had spent 40 years building things, bridges, water systems, county roads, and had spent the last decade of his working life in Virginia, and then had retired to a piece of property outside Harrow Creek that had belonged to his grandfather. He had no children. He had been married once briefly in his 30s, and the marriage had not survived the demands of his work. He lived alone. Your mother met him through a story. She was researching something about land use disputes in the county. Harlan had opinions about it, and he expressed them clearly, and she liked him immediately, the way she liked anyone who said what they meant. They became friends. Real friends, the kind that take a while to build and last. Harlan was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in the summer of 2020. By fall of that year, it was clear that the diagnosis was not going to resolve in his favor. Your mother began driving up to Harrow Creek on weekends to help. She cooked for him. She drove him to his appointments. She read to him when his eyes were too tired for the page. She held his hand at the end in April of 2021 when he went. Harlan left your mother the cabin and the land and a sum of money that was meaningful but not extraordinary. He had spent a great deal of his estate on the cancer treatment, and what remained was the property and a savings account and a trust he had set up for you specifically in the amount of $210,000 to be released on your 20th birthday. He did this, he told your mother, because he had watched her talk about you every Saturday for a year, and he wanted to do something for the daughter of a woman who had been at the end of his life the best friend he had. Vivienne contested the will in November of 2021. She claimed a long personal relationship with Harlan. She claimed that your mother had exercised undue influence. She lost. She contested again in March of 2022 with a different attorney and a different argument. She lost again. And then she stopped going to courts. She showed up at our house at 2 a.m. with her headlights off. She called your mother's editor and made claims about her professional ethics that were false and that took 3 months and a great deal of your mother's energy to disprove. She followed me to job sites. She found the pediatrician your mother had taken you to. When you were 14, you had a physical there, a routine thing, and she drove to that office and sat in the parking lot for 2 hours. The pediatrician called us. He was frightened. We filed 9 police reports between June and September of 2022. Everyone was closed without action. The evidence was not sufficient, the officer said. The behavior was troubling, but not technically criminal, they said. Then, on the 11th of September, 2022, Vivian came to our kitchen. Your mother had a neighbor there, a woman named Donna Reeves, who had stopped by to return a dish. Vivian walked in through the unlocked back door. She had done this before, and she stood in the middle of our kitchen, and she looked at your mother, and she said plainly in front of a witness, "Sign the papers, or I will make sure that girl of yours pays for what you took from me." Donna Reeves later told police she could not be certain of the exact words. Donna Reeves had known Vivian for 15 years. We understood at that point that we were not going to win this by staying. I want you to understand something, Nora. We did not leave you. We removed ourselves from your proximity because as long as she believed we were gone and could not be found, she had no reason to come for you. You were safer without us than with us. We believed that with everything we had. I still believe it. But belief is not the same as peace. And knowing something is necessary is not the same as being able to bear the cost of it. The next letter will tell you about the box on the mountain and what is in it. But before you go up that road, I need you to do one thing. I need you to go to St. Anne's Group Home in Roanoke and ask the manager. Not the current one. Find the one who was there from 2022 to 2023. Her name was Patricia Goss. She may have moved on, but someone there will know how to reach her and ask her about the woman who came to the front desk asking about your mail. What you find there will tell you everything about who Vivian Ashby is. I love you, Nora. Take your time. Ask Garrett to fix you something to eat before you drive back down the mountain. Dad. I read the letter twice. Then I folded it into my coat pocket, and I went and found Garrett in the barn, where he was checking the water line to the chicken coop, and I told him I needed to drive to Roanoke. He straightened up. He looked at me with the careful attention of a man who had been watching the situation develop for 3 years and had developed a good instinct for when things were shifting. Today, he said. Today. He nodded. You want company? No, I said. I need to do this part alone. He handed me a folded paper from his shirt pocket. Loretta wrote down Patricia Goss's number last week, he said. We figured you'd need it eventually. I stared at him. You knew about Patricia Goss. Your daddy told me enough, he said. Not everything, but enough. I took the paper. I drove the Bronco down the mountain and back onto Route 12, and I pointed it toward Roanoke, and I drove. Patricia Goss was not at St. Anne's anymore. She was living in a rental house on the east side of Roanoke, working part-time at a school supply store. When I knocked on her door that afternoon and told her who I was, she looked at me for a long moment with an expression that contained both recognition and something I could only describe as relief. The relief of a person who has been carrying something they are not sure they should have been carrying alone. She let me in. She made tea. She sat down across from me at a kitchen table covered in papers and said, I've been wondering when you'd come. Tell me about the woman, I said. Patricia Goss was in her late 50s with a practical face and the careful speech of someone who had learned to measure words in a professional context. She told me the story without embellishment, in the order it had happened, which was the order that made it land the hardest. The first visit had been in November of 2022, approximately 3 weeks after my parents disappeared. A woman she described as blonde white hair, mid-50s, well-dressed, had come to the front desk at St. Anne's and introduced herself as Nora Calloway's legal guardian and family representative. She had presented a letter, official-looking. Patricia said, though Patricia now believed it had been fabricated, stating that all correspondence for Nora Calloway should be redirected through her office for review, as the minor was involved in an ongoing legal matter. Patricia had been new to the position. She had not known the protocol well enough to question it. She had agreed. The second visit was in March of 2023. The woman returned this time to ask whether any correspondence had arrived. When Patricia said yes, several letters, the woman said she would take them. Patricia handed over a stack of perhaps 15 envelopes, all from Virginia Return, addresses, all in handwriting she did not recognize. She gave them to the woman. She watched the woman walk out with them. The third visit was in October of 2023. Same request, same result. After the third visit, Patricia said she began to feel uneasy. She had spoken to a colleague who told her the arrangement was highly irregular. She had tried to reverse it, had asked that future mail be held rather than redirected. But by that point, I had turned 18 and aged out of the system, and there was no more mail coming to St. Anne's with my name on it anyway. Because my parents' letters, which had been addressed to St. Anne's, were now being stamped and returned at the point of delivery from the inside from the front desk by a temporary staff member who Patricia later discovered had been recommended for the position by a woman who matched Vivian Ashby's description. 3 years. The system had been inside the facility itself. I drove back to Harrow Creek in the dark, in a silence that was not empty, but full of the shape of what I now understood. Vivian had not simply threatened my parents and driven them away. She had followed up. She had found the forwarding address. She had inserted herself into the one channel of communication my parents had left open, and she had closed it. For 3 years, every letter my mother and father wrote and sent had been intercepted and returned. Not by a bureaucratic error, not by a system failure, by a deliberate, patient, sustained act of severance. She had cut them off from me as efficiently as she had cut herself out of that photograph. I did not stop in town. I drove straight up Stone Mill Road and into the drive, and I sat in the Bronco for a few minutes with the engine running and the heater going and the dark of the mountain pressing against the windows. Then I went inside and I built a fire and I sat at the table with the second letter in front of me and I read the last paragraph again. The next letter will tell you about the box on the mountain and what is in it. I went to find Garrett. He was at his place at the bottom of the hill in his kitchen reading. When I knocked, he opened the door without surprise and said, "Come in, it's cold." Loretta appeared from the back room and had a plate of something in front of me before I had taken off my coat. "I need the second letter," I said. "The next one." Garrett reached to the shelf above the kitchen door and brought down an envelope. I opened it at his kitchen table, with Loretta sitting across from me and Garrett standing by the window with his arms folded, watching the mountain. Nora. "Good. You went to Roanoke. Now you know the shape of it. There is a box buried on the mountain. Take the old fire road past the cabin. It begins at the north side of the barn, and it is marked at the start by a cairn of 3 flat stones. The road climbs for 4 miles and ends at a small clearing above a frozen pond. At the base of a white oak at the northeast corner of the clearing, there is a second cairn. Dig 18 inches down. The box is steel waterproof, the size of a briefcase. Take the Bronco. She was built for that road. Inside the box is everything you will need. When you have read what is inside, take it to the attorney in town. Her name is Sylvia Crane. Her office is on the second floor of the Victorian on Main Street. She knew your mother. Tell her everything. There is one more thing I need to tell you about Vivian Ashby. In 2019, 3 years before she came for us, there was a family in Staunton, Virginia, named Alderton. A husband and wife, 2 children. A piece of land that Vivian had decided she was owed for reasons I was never able to fully reconstruct. She visited them. She made her case. When they refused to sign, there was a period of escalation that followed the same pattern as ours: the nighttime visits, the professional interference, the systematic pressure. The husband, a man named Gerald Alderton, went on a solo hiking trip in the fall of 2019. There was an accident on the trail. He has been in a long-term care facility since then, in a state of what the doctors call minimal consciousness. No charges were filed. There was no evidence. There never is. Vivian Ashby has done this before, Nora. She is patient and she is methodical, and she has learned from experience that people are reluctant to believe that someone in an expensive coat is capable of the things she is capable of. You are going to need the box. You are going to need Sylvia Crane. And you are going to need the town. Take your time, but not too much time. Love, Dad. I folded the letter. I looked at Garrett. "The fire road," I said. "I know the one," he said. Tomorrow morning, I said. Early. He nodded. Loretta put more food on my plate without asking, and I ate it without arguing, and we sat together in the warmth of their kitchen for another hour while the snow came down outside and the mountain held everything in its cold, patient stillness. I drove the Bronco up the fire road at first light. The road began at the north corner of the barn, marked exactly as my father had described, a cairn of 3 flat stones barely visible under an inch of new snow. It climbed from there through dense pine and bare hardwood, a one-lane track that had not been maintained in years, but had been built well enough that it held under the Bronco's tires. With only occasional protest, the truck moved up the grade with a steadiness that felt deliberate, as if it too understood where it was going and why. After 4 miles, the trees opened and the road ended in a clearing. Small, roughly circular, ringed with old pines, whose bark had gone the silver gray of long exposure. At the far end, a frozen pond, its surface perfectly still and pale as old pewter. Above the pond, through the pines, the sky was the particular clear blue that comes to mountain mornings after a night of snow, hard and bright and without depth, the kind of sky that makes sound carry farther than it should. I found the white oak at the northeast corner of the clearing. I found the cairn at its base, 3 stones under the snow, and I dug with the small folding shovel I had brought from the barn, and at 18 inches, my shovel hit something that was not frozen earth. The box was steel olive drab, military surplus, waterproof, sealed with a rubber gasket around the lid. I hauled it up out of the ground and set it on the Bronco's tailgate and brushed the dirt off with my gloved hand. I opened the lid. Inside 4 manila folders, each labeled in my father's block print. I opened the first. The will of Harlan Ashby, dated March 2021, signed in the presence of 2 witnesses and a notary. And I turned to the signature page, witnessed also by a Judge Harlan Oakes of Harrow Creek, Virginia. My mother's name on page 6. The trust for Nora Calloway, $210,000 to be released on her 20th birthday, June 3rd, 2025, 4 months away. I opened the second folder. 9 police reports filed by Elaine Calloway between June and September of 2022. Vivian Ashby at the grocery store. Vivian Ashby at the library. Vivian Ashby parked on the street in front of the house at 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning. Vivian Ashby at my father's job site in Staunton. Vivian Ashby at the pediatrician's office where my mother had taken me for a physical at 14 years old. Each report stamped in blue, case closed, insufficient evidence for action. 9 times. 9 times my parents had gone to the police, and 9 times they had been told there was nothing to be done. I opened the third folder. Photographs. Time-stamped. The silver Mercedes parked on a residential street, my parents' street, at 2:47 in the morning, at 3:14, at 1:55. Different dates spanning 4 months. The vehicle's Virginia plate clearly visible in each frame. My father had hired a private investigator. The investigator had documented everything that the police had declined to, and in the back of the folder behind the photographs, one more document. A single page typed, notarized, dated October 4th, 2022, 1 week before my parents disappeared. Sworn affidavit of Donna Reeves, resident of Roanoke, Virginia. On the evening of September 11th, 2022, I was present in the kitchen of Elaine and Warren Calloway at approximately 7:30 p.m. I witnessed the following exchange. A woman I know as Vivian Ashby entered through the rear door of the kitchen without knocking. She addressed Elaine Calloway directly. She stated, and I quote, to the best of my recollection, "Sign the papers, or I will make sure that girl of yours pays for what you took from me." This statement was made in a tone I would describe as calm and deliberate. I am making this affidavit at the request of Warren Calloway freely and without compensation, because what I witnessed has stayed with me, and I believe it should be on record, regardless of what happens next. I stood at the tailgate of the Bronco for a long time. I opened the fourth folder. Inside was a single document, a private investigator's report dated August 2022 on the subject of Vivian Ashby. 12 pages. I read it standing in the clearing with the frozen pond at my back and the blue sky above the pines and the cold so sharp it made my eyes water, or perhaps it was something else that was making my eyes water. Gerald Alderton, 54 years old. Staunton, Virginia. A trail accident in October 2019 in the George Washington National Forest. A fall of unknown cause from a rocky outcrop called Bishop's Ledge, approximately 2 miles from the Alderton property boundary. He had been found 2 days later by a search team alive but unresponsive. He had not spoken since. He was currently residing at a long-term care facility in Charlottesville. The private investigator had traced the land dispute, a piece of property adjacent to the Alderton farm, originally belonging to a family named Cressy, had been claimed by Vivian on the basis of a relationship with the late Frederick Cressy that she had represented as a domestic partnership. The Alderton family had been the primary opposition to her claim, as they held an easement on the disputed land that would have been rendered void by Vivian's acquisition. After the accident, the opposition had dissolved. The claim had been settled quietly in Vivian's favor 6 months later in April of 2020. No charges, no investigation. An accident on a hiking trail, and a family that stopped fighting afterward. I closed the folder. I looked out over the frozen pond. A single crow sat on a pine branch at the far edge of the clearing, watching me with the particular attentiveness of crows, which have always seemed to me to be paying more attention to human affairs than they are given credit for. My father had known all of this before he disappeared. He had gathered every piece of it, filed it in a waterproof steel box, driven it up a mountain road, buried it under 18 inches of frozen earth, and left it here for me. He had done this because he believed that one day I would come. He had been more certain of that than I had ever been of anything in my life. I put the folders back in the box. I put the box in the Bronco. I drove back down the mountain. Sylvia Crane's office was on the second floor of the old Victorian on Main Street, up a wooden staircase that smelled like beeswax and something older. The smell of a building that had been standing long enough to have accumulated its own particular atmosphere. The door at the top of the stairs had a frosted glass panel with her name stenciled in gold. I knocked. "Come in." She was 45 with dark hair cut short and reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck. Her desk was stacked in a way that suggested a productive disorder. Things were not messy, they were dense, full of the accumulated material of a working attorney who handled the legal concerns of a small mountain town and took that responsibility seriously. She looked up when I came in, and she looked at me the way Clifton Hale had looked at me, and Vera Sutton had looked at me with that particular quality of recognition that I was beginning to understand meant my parents had prepared these people too. "You're Nora Calloway," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "Sit down." She took off her glasses and set them on the desk. "Tell me everything." So I did. I told her from the beginning. The envelope under the door, the storage unit, the Bronco, Clifton Hale, the drive to Harrow Creek. Garrett and Loretta, the photograph with the cut edge, the chest full of returned letters. Vivian, At my door, calling herself my aunt, the drive to Roanoke and Patricia Goss, the letters from my father, and finally the box on the mountain. I put the steel box on her desk, and I opened it, and I laid the 4 folders out in front of her. She did not interrupt me once. She read each document in order carefully, her expression giving nothing away in the practiced manner of a person who has learned that the most useful thing an attorney can do in an initial consultation is listen and read and reserve judgment until the full shape of the thing is visible. When I finished, she put the last folder down. She looked at me over the desk for a moment. "Miss Calloway," she said, "I'm going to be direct with you. Vivian Ashby has filed a claim against this property. I know because I pulled the public records 2 days after I heard you'd arrived. Your father told me 3 years ago that a claim would come and that I should watch for it." She paused at my expression. "Yes. Your father called me before he left. He said he couldn't tell me everything, but he wanted me to know that his daughter would come one day and that she would need a lawyer who already understood the shape of the situation." She folded her hands on the desk. "You have 75 days before the claim moves forward unopposed. She is filed as a claimant with a historic and familial interest in the property, which in Virginia is a viable legal avenue if it goes uncontested. It will not be easy to dismiss on paper alone." She paused. "But paper is the smallest part of what you have, Miss Calloway." "What do I have?" I asked. "You have 9 police reports filed by your mother. You have a sworn affidavit from a direct witness to a threat. You have a private investigator's documentation of sustained harassment. You have the authenticated will of Harlan Ashby, witnessed by a local judge who is still on the bench and who knew Harlan personally." She looked at me steadily. "And you have this town?" She reached for the phone on her desk. "I knew your mother," she said. "She wrote a story 15 years ago about my younger brother. He had been accused of something he didn't do, and the story she wrote was the thing that finally turned the tide." She looked at me with an expression that was both professional and personal in equal measure. "I have been waiting a long time to pay that debt." She set the phone down. "I'll take your case," she said. "No fee up front. We'll discuss compensation when the claim is dismissed, which it will be." She stood. She held out her hand. "Now go home, Miss Calloway. Get some rest. We have 75 days, and I intend to use every one of them." I drove back to the cabin in the early dark of a January evening, the mountain road rising beneath the Bronco's headlights, the trees on either side holding their snow in the stillness that comes before the temperature drops again. I turned up the drive, and the cabin came into view, lit from inside warm windowed smoke coming from the chimney. Loretta had been up. She had started a fire. I sat in the Bronco for a moment before going in. I looked at the cabin, at the light in the windows, and the smoke above the roofline, at the rocking chair on the sagging porch that had survived 3 winters outdoors and was still standing. My father had built this for me. My mother had filled it with her handwriting and her hand cream and her list of things to buy at the grocery store. Garrett had kept it for 3 years and 4 months without missing a Sunday. A man named Clifton had paid the storage fees out of his own pocket, because decent men deserved that. Vera Sutton had framed a napkin and kept it on her wall. Sylvia Crane had been waiting to pay a debt she'd carried for 15 years. All of them waiting, all of them holding pieces of my life in trust until I arrived to claim it. Vivian Ashby had spent 3 years trying to sever me from every tether. She had not understood that the tethers she couldn't see were the ones that held the longest. I went inside. I sat down in my father's armchair. I looked at the photograph on the mantle, the one with the cut edge, the one with the missing person, and I thought about what my father had said in his letter. "You are going to need the box. You are going to need Sylvia Crane, and you are going to need the town." I had the box. I had Sylvia Crane. Now I needed the town. The first person I asked was Vera Sutton. I drove into Harrow Creek on a Thursday morning, 10 days after my meeting with Sylvia Crane, and I walked into the diner at 7:15 when the breakfast crowd was still thick and the coffee was still fresh, and I sat down at the counter and I waited until Vera came around with the pot. She filled my mug without being asked. "I need to ask you something," I said. She set the pot down and leaned against the counter and looked at me with those eyes that missed nothing. "I need people to stand with me," I said. "Sylvia Crane says we have a case. She says the documents are strong. But she also says the town matters. She says in front of a local judge, a community is worth more than paper." I paused. My mother came in here every Saturday for almost a year. My father drove down from that mountain in a truck covered in grease and ate sandwiches standing up because Vera's mother wouldn't let him sit. I've been here less than 2 weeks, and already this place feels more like home than anywhere I've lived since I was 16. I looked at her. "Would you be willing to sign an affidavit to come to the courthouse if it comes to that?" Vera Sutton looked at me for a long moment. Then she reached under the counter and brought up the framed napkin, the one with my mother's stick figure, drawing the one she had kept behind her register for 3 years, and she set it on the counter between us. "Honey," she said, "I have been waiting for someone to ask me that question since the day your mama walked out of here for the last time." That was the first yes. The second came from Clifton Hale, who drove 90 miles from his storage facility on a Tuesday afternoon because Sylvia had called him and explained the situation, and he had said without hesitation that he would drive twice that distance if needed. He sat in Sylvia's office with his reading glasses pushed up into his hair and gave his account in the measured, unhurried way of a man who understood that precision mattered and that what he said would be written down and signed and presented in a courtroom, and he wanted every word to be exactly right. "Warren Calloway told me his daughter would come one day," he said. "He paid in advance. He planned ahead. A man who plans 3 years ahead with that kind of care isn't planning to get lost on a mountain. He's planning to come back." Sylvia wrote it all down. The third and fourth came together, as they did most things, because Garrett and Loretta Pruitt had been a unit for 41 years and did not conduct their affairs separately when it mattered. Loretta's affidavit was 4 pages, handwritten in the compact, precise script of a woman who had spent years writing patient notes and medical observations and report cards, and who brought that same care to the task of telling a judge exactly what she had seen and known and done over 3 years and 4 months of watching a property that had been entrusted to her husband's keeping. She described my father's visits to their kitchen, the work he had done on the barn roof, the Saturdays he had come down the mountain covered in grease from the Bronco's engine, the way he had talked about me. Garrett's affidavit was 1 page, 3 paragraphs, every sentence a fence post. By the end of the second week, Sylvia had 7 affidavits. By the end of the third, she had 12. By the time we reached the 40-day mark, she had 19. And she told me on a Wednesday afternoon that she believed we were ready and that she had filed for an expedited hearing on the grounds of financial hardship. The trust that Harlan Ashby had set up for me could not be released while the property claim was active, which meant that the money my father had arranged for my future was being held hostage by the same woman who had already taken 3 years of my life. Judge Harlan Oaks set the hearing for the third Thursday in March. The day before the hearing, I drove to Roanoke to see Grandma Willa. She was having a difficult week. The nurses said she had been restless, waking in the night and calling out for people who were not there. When I came into the sunroom, she looked at me with eyes that were filmed and distant, and she called me by my father's name, and I sat beside her and held her hand and let her call me whatever she needed to call me. But near the end of my visit, something shifted. I watched it happen, the slow, focusing the lens, finding its subject, the eyes becoming present again in the way they sometimes did on what the nurses called her clear days. She looked at me. Nora, she said. Hi, Grandma. She squeezed my hand. Her fingers were cold and thin, but the grip was firm. Are you all right, baby girl? I'm all right, I said. I'm better than I've been in a long time. She studied my face for a moment. You found the cabin? She said. I found the cabin. Something went through her face. Relief, I thought, and something older than relief, the satisfaction of a person who has held on to hope through a long and difficult time and has finally seen it justified. Your daddy called me, she said. Did I tell you that about 8 months ago? He said you'd come. He said to hold on. She looked at the window. I've been holding on. I know you have, I said. She turned back to me. Is your mother? She's alive, I said. They both are. They're coming home. The two tears came down the same way they had in January, sliding into her collar in silence. She didn't make a sound. Good, she said when she had composed herself. Good. I stayed until the light began to go. I kissed her forehead when I left, and she held my hand a moment longer than necessary before she let go. And I drove back to Harrow Creek in the dark, with the framed napkin on the passenger seat, and the feeling that I was carrying something precious and fragile and almost complete. The morning of the hearing, I was up before the sun. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the photograph from the mantel, and I looked at it for a long time. My father's laughing face, my mother in the red flannel shirt, myself. At 3 years old, balanced on his shoulders with the particular fearlessness of a child who has never been dropped. The cut edge at the left. The space where Vivian had stood before she removed herself. At 7:30, Garrett knocked on the door. He was wearing a suit. It was dark blue, slightly too broad in the shoulders, the suit of a man who wore one approximately twice a decade and kept it maintained out of respect for the occasions that required it. He had combed his hair. His boots were clean. Ready, he said. Almost, I said. He waited on the porch while I went back inside. I picked up the photograph from the table. I looked at it once more. Then I set it face down on the mantel because today was not a day for looking backward. The courthouse in Harrow Creek was a single-story building of brick and riverstone at the east end of Main Street, built in 1923, according to the date carved above the door. Solid and unpretentious, the kind of building that had been designed to last rather than to impress. The courtroom inside was wood-paneled and warm, the morning light coming through tall east-facing windows in long rectangles that fell across the floor, and the gallery benches, and the table where Sylvia was already laying out her documents, with the efficient calm of a person who had prepared thoroughly and knew it. I walked in at 8:55. The gallery was full. Every bench was occupied. Garrett and Loretta sat in the front row, Loretta with her hands folded in her lap and her back straight. Vera Sutton was beside them, the framed napkin wrapped in a cloth bag she held carefully across her knees. Clifton Hale sat at the end of the row, his reading glasses on his face for once, a folder of documents on his lap. Behind them, the Holt family, father and son together, Beckett sitting beside his father with the shoebox of 47 receipts between them. The pastor of the Baptist church. The woman who ran the post office, whose name was Meredith, who had told me when I came in to file a change of address that she had once delivered a registered letter to my mother, and my mother had given her a jar of homemade jam in return, and she had never forgotten it. The man from the hardware store, whose name was Dale Finch, who had told me my father had come in every spring for sandpaper and wood stain and had never once tried to bargain on the price. A farmer named Arlo Sutherland, who had a handshake grazing agreement with my father and had honored the terms of it for 3 years after my father disappeared, because a Callaway's word was a fence post you could lean on. 21 people. I had come to Harrow Creek 3 months ago with $310 and a paper bag of clothes and a handwriting I recognized on an envelope that had been pushed under my door. 21 people had driven into town on a Thursday morning to stand behind me in a courthouse. I sat down at the table beside Sylvia. She looked at me and she nodded once, the nod of a person who has done everything that can be done and is prepared for what comes next. Vivienne came in at 9:02. She was wearing charcoal gray today, a different register than the camel coat. More formal, calibrated for a courtroom. Her attorney was a man from Richmond in a suit that cost more than my first car, which admittedly was not a high bar. He walked in ahead of her, and she followed. And when she crossed the threshold of the courtroom and saw the gallery, she stopped. Not for long, a second, maybe two, but I was watching and I saw it, the slight hesitation, the rapid assessment, the small adjustment that moved across her face as she understood what she was seeing. 21 people from Harrow Creek, Virginia, sitting on benches behind the girl she had been trying to dispossess. She sat down. Her face was composed. But something behind her eyes had changed, and I thought of what my father had written in his second letter, that she was patient in the way people were patient when they believed they were owed something. There was a particular kind of patience I had come to understand that looked identical to confidence right up until the moment it collapsed. Judge Harlan Oakes came in at 9:15. He was 63, broad-shouldered, with a face that had settled into an expression of permanent, careful attention. He had been on the bench in Harrow Creek for 27 years. He had, according to Sylvia, the reputation of a man who read everything he was given, remembered all of it, and had no patience for people who wasted his time. He sat. He looked at both tables. "We're here on the matter of Ashby versus Callaway," he said. "Ms. Crane, you may proceed." Sylvia stood. She presented our case in 52 minutes. She was methodical and she was thorough, and she was in the particular way of a lawyer who believes in what she is arguing completely without performance. She laid out the will of Harlan Ashby and noted that Judge Oakes himself had witnessed it in this courthouse in the spring of 2021. She presented the 9 police reports, reading the dates and the nature of each incident in a flat, factual tone that was more devastating than any oratory could have been. She presented the private investigator's photographs, the silver Mercedes on the residential street, at 247, at 314, at 155, the Virginia plate visible and clear. She presented the sworn affidavit of Donna Reeves. She presented the shoebox of 47 receipts, each one for 2 packets of marigold seeds, each one dated to a Saturday spanning nearly a year. She explained what they represented: a father who came into town every week, who bought flowers for a garden his daughter would someday tend, who paid cash and kept coming back. She let the jury of context assemble itself. She presented Loretta Pruitt's 4-page handwritten letter. She read 2 paragraphs of it aloud, and in those 2 paragraphs, Loretta described the morning Warren Callaway had come down from the mountain before dawn in the middle of a January cold snap, because the Pruitts' water pipe had frozen, and he had seen the light on in their kitchen from the ridge and come down to help, and had stayed 4 hours and refused coffee and gone back up the mountain in the dark without being asked. She presented the framed napkin. She set it on the exhibit table facing the bench, and Judge Oakes leaned forward slightly to look at it, and the courtroom was quiet enough that I could hear the heating system working in the walls. She presented Patricia Goss's written account of the 3 visits. When Sylvia sat down, Vivian's attorney rose. He was the kind of lawyer who relied on confidence and the weight of his firm's reputation, and both of those things were somewhat diminished by the fact that the gallery behind the opposing party contained 21 people who had each signed a document swearing to something true. He asked his questions. They did not land. He asked Clifton Hale whether it was possible that Warren Calloway had prepared the storage unit simply as a precaution with no particular foreknowledge of anything unusual. Clifton looked at him over his glasses. "Sir," Clifton said, "I have been running that facility for 31 years. I have had people leave units under unusual arrangements before. I have never had a man pay 3 years in advance in cash, leave a fully restored vehicle with his daughter's name engraved in the dashboard, and then disappear off the face of the earth 4 months later." He paused. "That is not a man taking a precaution. That is a man preparing for something specific." He asked Loretta Pruitt whether it was possible that her account of Warren Calloway's character was colored by personal affection. Loretta looked at him with the expression of a retired nurse who had spent 30 years delivering difficult information to people who did not want to hear it. "I am a woman who spent 3 decades assessing patients' conditions accurately under pressure," she said, "because the cost of inaccuracy in that profession is a person's life. I am not given to sentiment in my observations. Warren Calloway was a man of consistent character and reliable word. I observed him over 11 months at close range. What I wrote in that affidavit is what I observed, and I will stand behind every word of it." The gallery did not applaud. It was a courtroom. But I felt them all lean imperceptibly, like a field of grain, in a wind that was moving in one direction. Vivienne testified. She was composed, and she was practiced, and she deployed grief at the appropriate moments. A small catch in the voice here, a pause to collect herself there. She said she had loved Harlan. She said she had been misunderstood. She said she had only ever wanted what was fair, and that her pursuit of this claim came from a place of genuine familial feeling. Judge Oakes listened to all of it with the patient, attentive expression of a man who had been listening to people tell him things in this room for 27 years. When she finished, he looked at her for a long moment. The courtroom was very quiet. "Ms. Ashby," he said, "I have read the documents Ms. Crane has filed. I have read the police reports, that Ms. Calloway's parents filed in, each of which you denied the substance of the complaints. I have read the will of the late Harlan Ashby, which I witnessed at this bench, and I knew Harlan Ashby's mind." He paused. "I knew what he wanted, and I knew who he trusted. I also know what he did not want, and I know who he specifically did not trust, and that history is relevant to this proceeding." He looked at the exhibit table. He looked at the framed napkin. "I have also reviewed the recording submitted by Mr. Pruitt," he said. "The recording, Garrett's recording. I had not been in the room when Sylvia told me about it. I had been outside in the hall, and she had come out with a look on her face that I now recognized as the look of a lawyer who has just received the thing that closes the case. Garrett had given her the video 3 days before the hearing. He had filmed it on his phone, sitting in his darkened truck at the bottom of Stone Mill Road on the night Vivian had come to the cabin at 11 o'clock and tried the locks and made her phone call. The video was 80 seconds long. The audio was clear enough. Vivian's face in the courtroom did not change, but something beneath it went very still. "The claim is denied," Judge Oakes said. "The suit is dismissed. The harassment referral has been forwarded to the district attorney's office for consideration of appropriate action. The trust established by the late Harlan Ashby in favor of Nora Calloway will be released through the Silver Creek Savings Branch in Harrow Creek upon her 20th birthday as specified in the original instrument." He looked over the rims of his glasses at Vivian's attorney. "Counsel, I would suggest a thorough conversation with your client about the implications of that recording and I would further suggest that conversation take place before she leaves the county. He gathered his papers. Court is adjourned. Vivian's attorney gathered his things quickly and quietly. Vivian stood from her chair with the controlled movement of a person who has trained themselves never to show the full cost of a thing. And she walked toward the door without looking at the gallery, without looking at the exhibit table, without looking at me. At the door, she paused for a fraction of a second, not looking back, just pausing the way a person pauses at the edge of something. And then she walked through it, and she was gone. And the sound of her heels on the hallway floor faded, and then there was nothing. Loretta Pruitt put her two small hands on either side of my face. She had to reach up to do it. "Welcome home, sweetheart," she said. The gallery rose around us, and the room was warm, and the light was still coming through the east windows and falling in long rectangles across the floor, and I stood in the middle of it, and I let the moment be exactly what it was. That afternoon, Garrett brought me the third letter. He came to the cabin at 4 o'clock, while I was sitting on the porch in the rocking chair, watching the light come off the snow at the angle that only happens in late afternoon in March when the season is just beginning to think about changing. He handed me the envelope, and he sat in the other chair, and he didn't say anything because he understood that this was a letter a person ought to read in the near presence of someone they trusted and in the silence of a mountain that had been holding things in trust for a long time. I opened it. It was the shortest of the three. "Nora, if you are reading this, you won. Your mother and I will be leaving here within a few months. There are things to close out, arrangements to make, a life to carefully put down, and a different one to pick back up. We will be in touch through the phone in the Bronco. Keep it charged. When you see us coming up the drive, don't be too hard on your father. His leg has not been right since the winter before last, and he's too stubborn to admit it. So he will come up those porch steps like there's nothing wrong, and you'll be able to tell immediately that there is. Let him have the dignity of the pretense until he's had a few days to settle. The marigolds will come up in the spring along the south wall, the way they have every spring since your mother planted the first ones the year you were born. The color she chose was the color of you she always said bright and warm and impossible to overlook. Plant the packets from the shoebox, all 47 of them, fill that south wall until there is no space left. We are coming home, Nora. We swear it. All our love always. Mom and Dad." I folded the letter. I held it in my lap. Garrett sat in his chair and said nothing, and the light moved across the snow in the field, and the mountain held its long and patient silence. Spring came to Harrow Creek the way spring comes to mountain country, not all at once, but in increments, each one a negotiation. The snow retreated from the south-facing slopes, first, then the meadows, then the creek banks and the frozen creek along the tree line, loosened its surface, and began to move again. In the first week of April, a sound you could hear from the cabin porch if the wind was right. I planted the marigolds in the last week of March. All 47 packets against the south wall of the cabin, in the beds my mother had built in the soil, my father had amended and turned every spring for the year they had lived here. The seeds went in the cold, and I covered them and watered them and waited. Garrett taught me to split firewood. He said I swung a hammer like my father, which he said with a straight face, while I strongly suspected it was a kindness rather than a truth, and I chose to receive it as the former. Beckett Holt started coming up on weekends. He said it was to help with the fence line, which needed a season's worth of attention. And that was partly true. His hands were the hands of someone who had grown up doing actual work. And he knew the land in the way that people know land. They have grown up beside, and he did not treat the mountain with the slightly reverent caution of an outsider. He moved through it like he belonged there, which he did, in which I was beginning to believe I did too. In April, I drove to Roanoke, and I brought Grandma Willa back to the cabin. She made the journey in the passenger seat of the Bronco, wrapped in her rose-colored blanket, watching the road with the alert, interested attention of a person for whom the world has become primarily a visual experience. When we came up Stone Mill Road and she saw the cabin rise out of the meadow, she made a small sound, something between recognition and relief, and she said, "Oh, there it is." I set her up in the back bedroom, the one with the window that looked out over the south meadow. From the bed, she could see the raised garden beds along the wall, still waiting for the marigolds to come up, and, beyond them, the fence line and the tree line in the ridge above it. On a clear day, you could see the top of the ridge from where she lay, the bare rock of it bright in the afternoon light. She had good days and difficult days. On her good days, she sat in the rocking chair on the porch with her blanket and her coffee, and she pointed at the trees and told me their names: the white oak from the red, the poplar from the tulip tree, the shagbark, hickory from the mocker nut. Names her grandfather had taught her when she was a girl, and that had lived inside her, apparently in a place that the forgetting had not yet reached. On her difficult days, I sat with her and held her hand and let her call me by whatever name she needed. Vera Sutton started sending food up with Beckett on Fridays. Loretta came on Wednesdays. The cabin, which had been waiting, was becoming something else. In the first week of May, the marigolds came up. First one, then three, then a dozen, then a long continuous line of seedlings running the full length of the south wall, bright green and improbably vigorous, leaning toward the light with the particular optimism of things that have spent months underground in the cold and are making up for lost time. By the end of May, they were 6 inches tall. By the middle of June, the first flowers opened deep orange, the color of a late afternoon sky in September. The color that my mother had said reminded her of me. I stood at the south wall on the morning the first ones opened, and I looked at them for a long time, and I thought about my father buying 2 packets every Saturday for 47 Saturdays, one for himself and one for the boy, the girl who was coming. I thought about what it meant to prepare for a person's arrival over the course of a year, to do something small and ordinary every week as an act of faith in a future you could not guarantee but could not stop believing in. The phone in the Bronco rang on a Tuesday evening in the middle of September. I was up on a ladder painting the trim on the front porch. The windows were open, and I heard it from inside, the small, bright sound of the prepaid phone I had been keeping charged since January, placed on the kitchen windowsill where I could hear it from anywhere in the cabin. I came down the ladder. I went inside. I picked up the phone. My mother's voice. I had not heard my mother's voice in 3 years. It was the same, and it was different. The same particular timbre, the same cadence, but something in it had changed in the way that voices change when a person has lived through something that cost them considerably and come out the other side. "Nora," she said. I sat down on the kitchen floor. We talked for 40 minutes. She told me they were in a small town in Western Virginia, had been for the past year, closer than I had realized. She told me my father's leg had been injured in the second winter, a fall on ice, badly healed surgery that had helped, but not completely. She told me they had been following the case through Sylvia, who had kept them informed through careful, untraceable channels. She told me they had known about the hearing before it happened and had sat in their kitchen 3 states away, listening to the silence of not knowing until the phone rang and Sylvia's voice came through. She told me that when they heard the claim had been denied, my father had walked out to their backyard and stood in the dark for a long time, and she had watched him from the window and not gone out because some things a person needs to absorb alone. "We're coming in October," she said. "We need a few weeks to close things out here." but we're coming. I'll be here, I said. I know, she said. Your father never doubted it for a single day. On the third Friday of October, I was up on the ladder again, the south trim this time, the side that needed a second coat with Garrett below me, holding the paint can and making the occasional comment about my technique that I was choosing to interpret as encouragement. We heard the car before we saw it. The sound of tires on the gravel of Stone Mill Road, coming up from the bottom, moving at the unhurried pace of people who know they have arrived and are not in a rush for the last quarter mile. A Subaru. Dark blue older, carrying the specific weathering of a vehicle that has been used as primary transportation for a long time without apology. It turned into the drive. It came across the gravel and stopped in front of the cabin. I came down the ladder. I didn't remember my feet on the rungs. I was at the bottom, and then I was standing on the drive, and the Subaru's engine was ticking as it cooled, and nothing moved for a moment. The driver's door opened. My father got out. He was thinner than I remembered the way people get thin when a long period of difficulty takes something from them that they don't get entirely back. His hair was fully silver now. It had been threaded with gray when I was 16, and the 3 years had finished the job. He was holding a cane in his right hand, and he put his weight on it carefully as he stood, and I could see in the set of his jaw the particular expression of a person who is managing pain and has decided that this specific moment is not going to be defined by it. His eyes found me. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He closed it, swallowed, tried again. Still nothing. The passenger door opened, and my mother stepped out. She was wearing a red flannel shirt. I had seen that shirt once before in a photograph on a mantelpiece, a photograph I had turned face down in January because I could not bear to look at it. She was wearing it now in October in the drive of the cabin where that photograph had been taken 16 years ago, and the sight of it went through me like a current. Her hair had gone the color of winter wheat. There were lines at the corners of her eyes. She looked at me across the roof of the Subaru, and her face did the thing that faces do. When a long period of held tension finally releases, not collapse, but opening the way a fist opens when it finally lets go of the thing it has been gripping. Nora, she said. I walked toward them. My father took a step forward, and his cane slipped on the gravel, and my mother reached across and caught his elbow without looking, the reflexive steadying of a person who has been doing this for a long time, and they came together down the side of the car, and I crossed the last few feet between us, and then we were holding on to each other. All three of us in the drive of the cabin on the mountain in October, and the sound my father made when his arms came around me was the sound of a man who has been carrying something for 3 years and has finally been permitted to set it down. We stood there for a long time. At some point, I don't know how much later, I heard the porch door. I looked up. Grandma Willa had come out. She was in her slippers, her blanket around her shoulders, standing at the top of the porch steps with one hand on the rail. She looked at her son. She looked at her daughter-in-law. She looked at the three of us standing in the drive, and she sat down very slowly and carefully in the rocking chair, and she smiled. Not the uncertain half smile of her difficult days, not the polite smile she gave to nurses and strangers. The full smile, the one that went all the way back. That night, we ate at the table my mother had set 10,000 times in my childhood. Loretta had come up in the afternoon and cooked, and then had gone home because she understood without being told that the first meal was ours. Pot roast and potatoes and biscuits, and a chocolate cake that my mother had baked that morning. Before they left, she told me this over dinner that she had baked me a birthday cake every year, of the 3 years setting each one on the table and lighting a candle and taking a photograph before the end of the evening. Because she could not be there, but she could do that much. She brought the photographs out after dinner. 3 of them folded into the lining of her bag. 3 cakes I had never seen one candle in each. The table in the background, different in each one. The small rented kitchen of wherever they had been that year. 3 birthdays I had spent alone or in the company of strangers, while my mother lit a candle in a room I'd never seen and sang to an empty chair. She set them on the table beside the cake she had made that morning. "Open your eyes," she said. I hadn't realized I had closed them. I blew out the candle. The smoke went up in a thin line and disappeared. My father asked what I had wished for. "Nothing," I said. He looked at me. "I didn't wish for anything," I said. For the first time in my life, I sat at this table, and I didn't want a single thing that I didn't already have. He looked at his hands for a moment, then he looked up. "Good," he said. His voice broke clean on the word, and he didn't try to hide it. Grandma Willa passed in December in the back bedroom on a Wednesday morning when the snow was coming down outside her window and the ridge above the tree line was white against a white sky. My mother was holding her left hand, and my father was holding her right. Her last word was home. She said it twice with a pause between the way you say something when you want to make sure it has been heard. Then she closed her eyes and she was gone. We buried her on the ridge in a place my father had chosen, and she had approved on one of her final clear days under a white oak that had been standing longer than anyone in Harrow Creek could remember. Garrett dug the grave. The pastor from the Baptist church came up. Vera Sutton came. Beckett Holt stood beside me. It was cold and clear, and the sky was the particular hard blue of mountain December, and you could see 40 miles from where we stood ridge after ridge receding into the distance in shades of blue-gray that got paler as they went, until the farthest ones were barely distinguishable from the sky. My mother held my hand through the whole service and did not let go. Vivienne Ashby sold her condominium in the spring of the following year and moved to Nevada. Sylvia heard this through a colleague and passed it along without ceremony. The district attorney's office had completed its review and forwarded the matter for further investigation, which was the careful language that meant the thing was not finished, but was no longer Harrow Creek's problem to carry. The person who had been redirecting mail at St. Anne's, a temporary placement worker who had held the position for 11 months before moving on, was identified through Patricia Goss's account and pursued through a civil action. The matter was settled quietly. His name does not need to be here. Beckett and I were married in the South Meadow on a Saturday in June of 2028. My father and I had planted a row of young aspens along the meadow's east edge the spring. We all came home, and by the summer of the wedding, they were tall enough to make a canopy of leaf light over the guest chairs. Garrett Pruitt walked me in. He was wearing the dark blue suit, better fitted now after Loretta had taken it in, and he walked with the particular solemnity of a man who understood the gravity of the role and was not going to waste a moment of it. My father stood at the front. He had a cane, and he had tears, and he had the expression of a man who is standing inside, a moment he was not always certain he would live to see. My mother stood beside Loretta Pruitt, who was her matron of honor, and the two of them looked at each other when I came down the aisle and shared something that didn't need words. Sylvia Crane read from Ruth, "Whither thou goest, I will go." The old words, the words about choosing your people and staying chosen. We ate and we danced, and the aspens moved in the June wind, and the marigolds along the south wall of the cabin were in full bloom, orange and rust and gold, the color of late light on the ridge. The color my mother had said was the color of me. My father and I have a standing date on Saturday mornings in the growing season. We get in the Bronco he drives now, his leg better enough for it, though he keeps the seat pushed back further than I do, and we go down Stone Mill Road and along Route 12 into Harrow Creek, and we stop at Holt's Feed and Seed, where Beckett's father still runs the counter, and Beckett himself can sometimes be found in the back doing inventory. We buy 2 packets of seeds. Marigold's always the deep orange kind. The rust kind, the kind that smell like summer earth and keep their color until the first frost. 1 packet for my father. 1 packet for the girl who came home. The cabin is still standing. The porch still sags on the left side and will until I get around to replacing that second step, which has been on my list since January of 2025. The stone chimney still draws well in cold weather. The rocking chair on the porch has survived another season outdoors and shows no intention of stopping. The marigolds come up every spring without fail, from the south wall all the way around to the front steps now, because I have added to them every year, and they have spread the way things spread when they are tended and left to do what they do. My mother writes letters still, not on cream-colored cards to an address where they won't arrive. She writes them on the backs of envelopes and grocery receipts and the margins of newspapers, and tapes them to the refrigerator, to the bathroom mirror, to the inside of the cabinet where she keeps the baking soda, and the vanilla and the good coffee. Small letters. 1 or 2 sentences. Things she wants me to know. I keep every one. If you have stayed with me all the way to this moment, through the cold January morning in the storage unit, and the mountain road, and the cabin, and the woman in the camel coat, and the courthouse and everything that came after, then I want to ask you one thing before you go. Has anyone in your life ever prepared something for you that you didn't know about until you needed it most? A letter found too late or just in time? A savings account? A name written on a piece of property? A truck with your name engraved in the dashboard, waiting in the dark? Tell me in the comments. Tell me what they prepared and who they were. Because somewhere tonight, someone is reading those comments who needs to be reminded that the people who love them have been thinking ahead. That preparation is a form of love. That someone somewhere has been holding something in trust for them, waiting for the road to find them. The road always finds you. I know that now. God bless you, and I'll see you right back here on the mountain.